Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 has finally been released, and it's safe to say that this chapter is very interesting. I've never ever felt more conflicted about any chapter in the entire Poppy Playtime franchise like I have with this one. It had some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows of any of the games, having the single best moment from any Poppy Playtime game, but also being a massive disappointment at the same time. There is a lot to talk about in this game, and I'll be talking about the entire game from start to finish, giving you my opinion on everything to do with this chapter. So with that, let's press play and get into this chapter. But before that, the teasers and trailers for Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 were literally just like the game, with it having some of the best and worst teasers I have ever seen from this franchise. The 3 ARG tapes that were released for this chapter were all incredible, featuring some of the darkest and most disturbing imagery that we have seen yet, touching on the horrific experiments, the Hour of Joy, and also introducing some new potentially horrifying characters. It was safe to say these teasers had me super hyped. However, when the gameplay trailer released, a lot of feelings washed over me, mainly worry, fear, and disappointment. The main trailer had a lot of problems, from the character designs not fitting with the game's aesthetic, aka Lily Love Braids, to the fact you could literally see out of bounds in the trailer. The animations also looked terrible, and the only good part of the trailer was the intro cinematic, with the tease at the end revealing the prototype's face, which I mean, yeah, sorry, we'll talk about that one later. Obviously, I will talk more on Lily Love Braids once we see her in-game, but something I will mention from the trailer, this character just feels very out of place compared to literally every other single character that we have seen beforehand. The Ratchet and Clank character also just doesn't seem to fit very well, and whatever these little things are meant to be also don't fit either, but compared to her, they aren't that bad. On that note, these designs just don't have the potential to be scary. Sure, in previous chapters we had Dowie, but Dowie actually had the potential to be scary. It's such a shame they didn't deliver on him all that much. Obviously, Huggy Wuggy is shown a lot in this trailer as well as the prototype, which obviously is very exciting. And from what we saw, things looked cool, although one immediate thought was, is this the final chapter? Well, I'm gonna spoil it right now. No, it's not. Now, getting into that, in order to talk about whether or not this game should have been the final chapter, we actually need to talk about the game itself. So with that, let's press the subscribe button, I mean the play button, although you should totally press the subscribe button too. Let's begin the game. Like all Poppy Playtime chapters, the game starts with the commercial for a line of toys that the chapter will be based on. And this chapter and commercial introduces us to the wrong side animals. Which I have to start with saying, who approved this concept? This has to be one of the dumbest and stupidest lines of toys they have ever created for this franchise. Like, I'm sorry, I will only mention this one more time, but the making new toy lines just to make merch is something that we have been aware of from the beginning, very prevalent with the Chapter 4 Nightmare Critters literally being reskins of the Smiling Critters, and while yes, the Smiling Critters are literally the exact same thing, at least they were good. These guys just suck. However, despite not liking the designs and the characters that are the wrong side animals, I will compliment the cinema that is the commercial, since the disturbing, realistic visuals with the ARG elements allow this tape to stand out from the rest. While not being nearly as disturbing as Chapter 3's tape, it is definitely up there in the top 3 tapes for me, especially this shot of the creature breathing. That is absolutely horrifying and the kind of horror I love in Poppy Playtime, which is sad because you very rarely see it. I will touch on this point later on, but anyways, after the intro cutscene, we get straight into the action. Starting right at the end of Poppy Playtime Chapter 4, with Huggy Wuggy slamming down the door and instantly starting a chase. Now, right off the bat, this is a fire way to get into the game, as it puts you right into the action and makes the tension super high. It instantly puts you on edge, as you instantly have to adapt to the situation or you will die. Now, this is similar to Chapter 3, where you instantly need to jump out of the crusher, but this is definitely the most intense start to a chapter we have seen yet. So, you go through the Huggy chase, and he's pretty much on you the whole time, introducing you or reintroducing you to all the old mechanics from the previous games, while keeping you on your toes. I died a lot here, but hey, I'm getting back into the swing of things. But after surviving Huggy Wuggy in his Minecraft break animation, we fall into the trailer room and we get to see outside of the cave, and dear god, how big is this place? You do a few more puzzles, which introduce you to some new mechanics like the valves and the boxes. You get another chase and get stuck in an elevator where Huggy is attacking you from every single angle. Which I will say, would be cooler if he was an actual threat and it also wasn't just insanely long, but whatever. At the very least, it does a good job making the player feel like they are constantly in danger, which is something Chapter 3 and 4 really struggled with. I mean, every chapter has these moments, but even when you aren't in danger, there are moments I wish it felt like you were, and although it doesn't keep that up this entire chapter, I feel this chapter did a pretty good job at making you feel like you were in danger at a lot of moments. Again, it's not something that's constant, which is something I wish the games did do, but at least the effort was made. I do want to say on this note, when making a horror game, while I understand you don't want to constantly bombard the viewer with scares 24/7, because otherwise they will get fatigued, you can still build dread while allowing the player to calm a bit. You can do this through the atmosphere, through the music, through sound cues, through visuals, through storytelling, and you will notice in a bit that in certain sections of this chapter, which are undeniably the best parts of the chapter, they do this, like they actually do this. But overall, it's not super present, and in some instances are ruined by other factors. But again, we will talk about that later. After you dodge Huggy a few times, he takes your grab pack and the title screen rolls. For an intro sequence, this was pretty good. Not the best opening of any of the games. In my opinion, that goes to 3 or surprisingly even 4, which if you guys don't know, is my least favourite of the games. But it is still a solid opening and really gets you into the action right away. I'm giving this section a solid 8 out of 10. However, it does lose a point because of the title of the chapter. No offense, but Broken Things is kind of boring, generic, and just doesn't really fit the chapter all that well. Like on a surface level, sure it does, like get it, there's things in the chapter and they are broken, oh my god, but I think it's one of the weaker titles. Not the weakest, that goes to chapter 1, but it's not too far off. Anyways, from the intro, we find ourselves in this weird industrial section similar to 4's, but with this weird pinkish goop everywhere, which is just kind of there. I forget what it's called. It does hurt you if you walk into it, but it has some factors which are mainly used for puzzles, and it's not important at the moment. Anyways, we go through these rooms doing puzzles and using a new flashlight and blacklight tool in order to navigate the world around us and scare off these little things. On that note, the blacklight is super cool and creates some really interesting puzzles for us to do. Though, if I'm being completely honest, I feel like they could have done a lot more with the blacklight. The blacklight honestly is mainly used to find secrets and collectibles, which is fine, but I wish it had more practical use with the puzzles because honestly, that was one of the most fun parts of the game for me. But it's not super important, so I guess it's okay. After this, we meet Giblet, and this character is a very interesting one. I have to say that overall, I am a fan of him, and he's an interesting addition to the franchise, but he is a Skylanders NPC if I've ever seen one. We see Giblet speed up to get to a loading zone, watch the prototype kill a toy, some dialogue with Giblet. Now, one thing that Giblet really does that gets on my nerves is he repeats a single line like 500 times throughout the entire chapter. That being,
I'm not some kind of hero.
I get this is meant to be some kind of character building, but it's really on the nose, and I can tell you have to hyper explore his lore to understand the reason, which from what I saw, I believe it's something about him trying to save people, but he was forced to kill them anyways, and he just feels guilty about it. But at the same time, it really gets on my nerves from the amount of times he says it. Again, I also just don't like the concept of who he is and what kind of toy line he's meant to be a part of, so it's hard to get really invested. Even later on, when we meet his other part, Chum, as much as Chum is the goat, they're in the chapter for like 3 seconds. They put you in their mouth to hide you from the prototype, which is something from Where the Wild Things Are, and that's it. Also, I love Chum, but he looks like someone straight out of Ban Ban, although he's not my least favorite design in the game. But anyways, afterwards, you get a new grab pack from Bron. He's finally here, holy shit. Anyways, Bron has the new grab pack in his mouth, and I gotta say, after waiting so long, Bron's design is pretty cool. The idea of him being stuck in this cycle of having to eat so others can eat off him is pretty disturbing, and the fact that Bron is so high out of his fucking mind does not help matters. Anyways, at this point in the game, we get pretty much the main meat of the game, which is puzzles. Obviously, puzzles are good. We like puzzles. However, this chapter has a lot of them, and I mean a lot of puzzles. Like, compared to the other chapters, this entire chapter is like 85% puzzles. And on top of that, a lot of them are back to back. Something I didn't like in previous chapters that unfortunately is still present in this one is the progression of a very small amount of space through very multiple cryptic puzzles. Now there is one section where this does work extremely well, which is actually the next section of the game. But for reference, something I think Poppy Playtime really struggles with when it comes to puzzles is actually having meaning behind the puzzles. What I mean by this is there should be a reason that we are doing the puzzle. For instance, a basic example is like, to get to a new section. However, unless there's a reason for that puzzle to exist, it just feels like padding, and a lot of this game is just filler and padding, which is really sad. However, I'll talk more about that once we get into the second half of the game. For now, let's talk about the best part of this entire chapter, and in my personal opinion, the best part of the entirety of Poppy Playtime, the memory section. So, Poppy Playtime as a game franchise struggles with it being a little too kiddie and marketable in a franchise I actually think could be really disturbing, scary, and unnerving with some really powerful themes of humanity in them. This is why I loved the AIG trailers and love Poppy Playtime Analog Horror. It really explores these themes, and the experiments performed on the specimens, aka the children, are horrifying, and seeing the way they were brainwashed is incredibly depressing. However, up to this point, that was all outside media. Sure, through tapes and all the environments and retelling arts and stuff, we got ideas of what exactly was going on. However, in this section, we actively live through it. This section takes place in what is basically the main lab for brainwashing the kids who have become or were selected to become the toys. Now, I have to say, while there are more visuals and locations that explore this more, this is the main section, and it's honestly one of the more unsettling locations in the game. Seeing all the various rooms that would have belonged to a child is very creepy, and that with the music brings a sadness that is hard to top. Poppy Playtime, in my opinion, is heavily carried by its beautiful yet unsettling music, which a lot of people just don't notice. And I have to give props to how great the music is in not only just this section of the game, but overall throughout the franchise. Now, I do actually have some complaints about the music later on in the chapter, but for now, it's absolutely peak and really hits you right where it needs to. But this section is basically having to go into this machine and watch or quite literally play inside of 3 memories of Huggy Wuggy while having to go and find the new memories throughout the facility. You complete puzzles in order to access the memory chips, the memory cards? I don't know what you call these, but anyways, this is what I mean by the progressive puzzles, where you need to complete a puzzle in order to navigate the story. And it's done in a fantastic way. The first memory is shown to us first, getting us hooked onto the concept and wanting to see the other 2. Then we navigate the puzzles, and on top of the puzzles being very well done, they are also quite fun to complete, and much of that has to do with the 2 new hands, which I will talk about now. There are 2 new hands that replace the original green, purple, and gun hands, that being the pressure hand and the elemental hands. I think that's what I'm going to call it from now. But anyways, both of these hands are used very well, and are in my opinion some of the best hands the game has ever had. The pressure hand allows you to break things and push objects, while the elemental hand allows you to interact with the 3 elements, that being fire, ice, and electricity. That's not really an element, but whatever. This one basically being a new version of the original green hand, but I actually think that these were done very well, and all the puzzles using these hands are super fun to complete, although pushing the large batteries can be very tedious, and maybe a bit stupid at times, but that's a very minor complaint. The pressure hand is used for a lot of different things, and that's just one thing. The other new mechanic, which I will mention, is now that there are magnetic walls everywhere that the player can attach themselves to. And these are pretty cool, but they're nothing incredible, just a fun way to navigate the environment. But anyways, we're meant to be talking about the memory section, not the game mechanics. So the 3 memories of Huggy Wuggy and the environment surrounding it, including the various rooms and tapes that you can find, are absolutely amazing, and are honestly creepy, unsettling, and terrifying, while also making you just feel sick. The first of the 3 memories involves you as Huggy needing to solve a puzzle by putting different shaped objects into the bin in front of you when needed. This is where we are introduced to Gracie Green, who might be the most hated character in the entire franchise for me, but for good reason. Gracie is the lead counselor in the wellness and integration sector, which is the section at the factory we're in, which the name's just unnerving, should have mentioned that earlier. But basically, she's the one who delivers the message and instructions to the toys, and she's just so evil and scary, and I hate her. You know, these messages brainwash the kids, and it's so unsettling. Even in the first memory, you get this unease about her as she manipulates you into performing these tasks, and you just get the sense of what these kids would have had to have gone through, and it's just wrong. However, Memory 2 is by far the worst one. In Memory 2, you are in a room with 4 little smiling critters and are instructed to dance when the music plays, and to stand on your Huggy light when the music stops. All the while, one critter is curled up on the floor crying and begging for it all to stop. All the while, Gracie in all her evil soul is trying her best to make good of a bad situation, but is clearly struggling. Eventually, Gracie says that the toy is out and needs to be put into the bad toy box. And this is where we get a horrifying realization. We, the player, need to put this toy into the box. And the screams and pleas coming from the little toy while the music cuts out is just gut-wrenching and makes you feel sick. Then, when you finally do put the toy into the box, it just continues and leaves you with this deafening silence that will never leave you. Even when you eventually put more of the toys into the box and are told you're going to be put into your own special box for not putting the toys into the box fast enough, encouraging the player to panic before the minigame ends. I'll be completely honest, I wish the entire chapter focused on this aspect, because it is so unbelievably spectacular and terrifying at the same time. This is easily one of, if not the best moment from Poppy Playtime. From there, the third minigame has you strapped into a seat and forced to watch a video before you break out and kill the guard who is studying you. It's the shortest, least intense, but honestly is very entertaining and works quite well. Overall, this section, the lore that you can find in this section, and just the general vibe is absolutely incredible, and I have to give massive props to Mob for making this. 10 out of 10 section. Make more stuff like this. Now, on that note, we get to see Huggy's backstory, but now we progress to the next part of the game where we once again encounter Huggy Wuggy, and let's talk about him. So obviously, from the start of the chapter, Huggy Wuggy has been on us like a hawk, and having to face him right after the memory stuff is so awesome. Huggy appears a lot in this chapter, and I think his character is done exceptionally well. It's implied heavily that he was sent by the prototype to kill the player, and he seems super desperate to do so, smashing through objects, through walls, while never letting up the chase. Making chapter 1's chase by comparison seem just so weak, and while I do prefer that chase for other reasons, the chapter 5 Huggy chases are just as good in my opinion. Now the Huggy Wuggy hide and seek section, as I will call it, is actually one of the cooler parts of the entire game. You are stuck in a room and need to escape it through the big metal door at the end of the room by powering up both the electrical hands and by placing the 3 batteries in. All the while you need to avoid Huggy by sneaking around or playing various tapes to distract him. And I think that this section is done super well. Besides one thing which I'll mention now. And no, it's not Huggy's AI, although in some parts it is really funny how he goes to just straight running at you to lol, never mind. No, I actually want to use this section to talk about the music for this chapter. Now, I praised Poppy's music before, and that's for good reason. It's very good, and calling it any less than brilliant would be an insult. But I will be completely honest, chapter 5 was a downgrade. I already commented on the poor animation and jump scares, which is something else this chapter isn't the best with. But the music in this chapter just feels a bit generic and bland compared to the other ones. Sure, they were trying something different in certain parts, this section being an example, but I just don't think it works as well as I would have liked it to. Nothing against this section at all. If I'm being completely honest, it's more of a pet peeve than anything. But anyways, on that note, the puzzles in this minigame are really good, and the fact that you have to get Huggy to break a wall in order to access the final battery is super cool. The tapes are cool, Huggy is threatening, and this minigame features something I wish this chapter and previous chapters had more of. Having an actual threat in your puzzle solving area, like, come on, it makes it more intense and more scary, even if you can't see the threat because you're scared they will pop out at any moment. And this section definitely got me on edge. The puzzle itself is a little bad because pushing batteries is little hell, but other than that, I really enjoyed this section and all it had to offer, which really allows Huggy to be seen as an actual threat. Huggy Wuggy in this chapter feels more like a threat than any character from chapter 4, and I mean that with all my heart. I give the Huggy Wuggy section here a 7 or 8 out of 10. I think it's done really well. But now let's get into my least favorite part of the entire game, with probably my least favorite transition between sections. So the Sweet Tree and Lily Lovebraid section of this chapter is where this chapter starts to fall apart. Talking to some friends of mine, this was a very divisive section with some highlights and also some of the worst gameplay sections in the entire franchise, which we will talk about. The first part of this section has you navigating a car through the area of the Sweet Street, which I will say, not only does this area just not look as good as like the rest of the chapter, but this thing existing is just sad. Playcare was this super awesome cool location that was unique. This is like the Ban Ban version. It also doesn't help this entire section feels like Ban Ban in my opinion. I don't like how any of it looks, and the first part with the car has to be the single most boring part of the entire game. You literally drive forward, stop, get out of the car, power the car by hitting this electrical thing, and drive again. And you do this like 5 times, and there's no puzzles with it. It's just driving, and you know, while fair enough, it's not a bad idea, a cooler idea would have been to have the section be a little bit smaller and allow the player to stop the car if they wish. But whatever, I've learnt not to ask too much, although later on, you'll see why I wish I could. After a while, you get cornered and brought to a house by Lily Lovebraids, who has the single worst design in the entire franchise. I'm sorry, she just does not fit into this universe at all. Later on, she's in scenes of other characters, and she stands out like a sore thumb, and I mean that in a bad way. She does not fit at all, and she's probably the single worst character in the entire franchise. It doesn't help that she's literally Gracie from the tapes. And later we do see Gracie's skeleton in her bed, which is the only good part of this section, I guess, besides one other part. Kinda. We find Poppy and Kissy in a cell and have to free them, which honestly, this could have set up for a very, very interesting switch of endings. Assuming this is the way the chapter was going to be, because I thought it was going to be the final chapter, which it wasn't. Imagine you had to choose to either free Poppy and Kissy, or you side with Lily and the prototype. I think it's cool, but whatever, I guess a man can dream. The whole section is just a fetch quest followed by more puzzles to free Poppy and Kissy, and this section is kinda pointless. It really feels like filler, and the only positive besides the skeleton is I do like the idea of the hidden rooms quite a bit. But anyways, the only other section that's worth talk about is the black light, red light, green light section, which, it just sucks, man. Like, this chick just waffles on so long, it's really tedious, it's boring, nothing really happens, like PJ Pugapillow did it better. Eventually, we are all caught by Lily, who summons the prototype to the tea party, and we finally get to see the prototype's design. Now, I will comment on this in a bit, since it's more in line with some other points I want to mention. For now, I want to finish talking about this section because after the dialogue here, where it looks like the prototype kills Poppy, although he doesn't, Kissy breaks free and attacks the prototype, causing him to flee and you to run away, only to be called by Lily in what is the single worst chase in the entire franchise. Nothing about this chase is fun, interesting, or actually good. It's weird, cryptic, and the fact that Lily just isn't scary makes me want to die. This was actually one of the worst chases I have ever seen from any game, and it doesn't help that Lily's jump scare was just straight ass, especially with her attempt to be scary. Anyways, eventually you will kill her, which is really funny, I do love the way she dies. And from there, the chapter starts to get good again. But at the same time, this section was just absolutely terrible, and honestly one of my least favourite sections. Literally terrible, 1 out of 10. Extra point for the prototype reveal, which is sad because why was he revealed in this place of all places? But speaking of which, now, the prototype design did get leaked like a few days beforehand by CG5's animators of all people, but thankfully I did manage to dodge it, and I'm glad I did because holy crap, I loved this design. Now, granted, I don't think it's the most amazing design they ever made, and nothing they did would have been worth the 5-year wait, but I think overall it's a pretty decent design. Sure, it looks like Pomni from Amazing Digital Circus, but I actually think that this design is very cool and menacing, and while it's not what I expected, it's fine as is. Honestly, if I had to give an opinion on it, like, I like it, but it's very safe. Like, very safe. Basically, the safest design they could have gone with. Not bad, but it doesn't stand out a stupid amount. However, despite that, the prototype's presence in this chapter is very well done. He is extremely menacing and really emphasizes his threat level throughout the chapter, as this unstoppable force of nature. But with that, let's discuss the last part of the game just before the ending. After doing some more puzzles, you get into another Huggy chase where eventually you meet Kissy Missy T-posing at the end of the hallway. We then get this very soft cutscene where Kissy and Huggy connect to each other. It's actually quite, like, touching. Kissy shows so much sympathy and emotion despite not moving her face at all. It's actually quite a nice scene. which is ruined by the prototype stabbing Huggy in the back and killing him before annihilating Kissy Missy with one smack, finally killing both characters, again. We then get the final boss / chase scene with the prototype, where you use every single tool at your disposal that you have learnt throughout the game to fend him off, and make your way through the train, and it's honestly very well done. I think this is the best chase / boss fight in the entire series, as it doesn't drag out, has super intense and fun action throughout. I mean, there's like moments where like the prototype will use previous lines from the other games. It's really setting up the end of the franchise. It feels like a final boss fight. In fact, this is probably the most fun chase in the entire Poppy Playtime franchise, which is incredible. Like, this would have been the perfect way to end the game and the entire, like, game franchise. It was so well done. And honestly, like, I thought it was. Like, you know, you crash the train and it looks like you kill the prototype. I thought this would be a fire ending to the game. Until, well... So after the train crash, the prototype is revealed to have survived, which, I mean, I guess that makes sense. Runs at you and then stabs you in front of Poppy. From there, it looks like you were dragged and dropped into a vat of goo, which you stay in for a while until Giblet wakes you up. Now pause here. There are two possible explanations here. If the prototype is dropping the player into the goop, this is stupid as hell, because how do you go from here to here? Like, that makes no sense. But if this is meant to be Poppy's POV, then it makes sense, but I think it should have been a bit more heavily explained. Also, I was so certain this was the bad ending for the final chapter, which got me super excited, because imagine this was the bad ending and then there was a good ending you could unlock. But I realized that I was still alive and we were still playing. Now the ending of this chapter really frustrates me. You go into this room and you put in the override code or whatever it is that you had to collect later on, or I don't know, and it's revealed that the Doctor is somehow alive and he is the override. And that's how the game ends. Now this is kinda cool, but it's literally how chapter 4 ended too. What was actually changed? Nothing. Literally nothing. Poppy was taken by the prototype, Huggy and Kissy are dead, and a dead character is brought back to life. Honestly, such a disappointing ending to this chapter, and what's more disappointing is that this chapter just didn't end. Now, why would I have a problem with Poppy Playtime Chapter 5 not being the final chapter? Why wouldn't you want more Poppy? Well, here's the thing. When you look at a narrative, you look at the beginning of a story, how the story progresses, the highs and lows of the characters before having a conclusion. All Chapter 5 did was redo the downgrade that Chapter 4 introduced. The chapter sets up so well for it to be the final chapter. Like, I don't like Chapter 4, but it does a very good job at, like, allowing the player to just feel helpless. Which means that when eventually they rise and actually beat the prototype, you feel more rewarded. But it just doesn't deliver. The prototype reveal, bringing back old characters, the environment, and the talk of bringing down the prototype, it's a nothing burger, and honestly, what more can they actually do? How much more can they actually tell and do for this story? How much can they drag this game series out? How much story is actually left to tell? Because there's really not that much else. All you have is the Doctor coming back, which, you know, opens the doors for some ideas, but it's not needed. Obviously, this chapter not being the final chapter was expected because Mob Entertainment only cares about money, but God, I wish it would end. This chapter had some high hopes of it being a great finale, ending the story where it should have, but because it's not the final chapter, it just feels like a filler chapter, and honestly, if 6 isn't the final chapter, I'm going to lose all care for this franchise. Sometimes less is more, and Poppy doesn't have the benefit of a franchise like Five Nights at Freddy's, where it can just, you know, it's across multiple locations. It's one location. How deep can this place get? And on that note, where else is there to go in this, where do we go? How much ground can the prototype actually cover? It ruins all the high moments of this chapter and makes the low moments really suck. But with all that, the game is finally over. Unfortunately not forever. I'm sure chapter 5 will come out to the end and it will actually end in chapter 6, but overall, did I like the chapter? Well, overall, the chapter was decent. It had a lot of filler and overall felt like a filler chapter, but it had some very high moments. The prototype chase, the Huggy hide and seek, and of course the memory section. However, the ridiculous amount of puzzles, the ending, and the Lily Lovebread section in its entirety didn't do it any favors, and honestly dragged the game down for me. Despite that, this is the third best chapter in my opinion. nowhere near as good as 3, and 2, which is my second favourite, despite 5 having stronger moments than both 2 and 3, the bad stuff is just too much to ignore. 2 is mid at times, but it's consistent, and I prefer a shorter consistent experience to an experience of ups and downs. Although overall, 2 barely beats out 5, and given the different day, I might swap my opinion. Like on a replay, I might swap my opinion. Also, if you can't tell, I like 3 now. But as it stands, this chapter gets a 6.5 out of 10. I think this chapter was decent and a step in the right direction in a lot of ways, but I wish they had made this the last chapter and really focus on making this game as good as possible. But a man can dream. Hopefully 6 will be the final chapter, because otherwise I'm gonna lose all care for this franchise. This franchise, despite its company, its history, has a lot of positives, and I want to see this game truly succeed. But if it does get down the path of quantity over quality, I don't think people will look back at this franchise in a positive light. I just wish the best for this franchise, but we will see. Anyways, that has been my review of Poppy Playtime Chapter 5. I hope you enjoyed. Be sure to subscribe and check out my other videos to help support the channel, and a special thanks to all my channel members. Thank you all for all the support, and an extra special thanks to everyone who was so kind to me and sent such kind thoughts and prayers after the whole truck incident. That really meant a lot. Anyways, thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next video.